The Dark Knight Rises is more than a conventional superhero sequel. Released in 2012, Christopher Nolan's final chapter in his Batman trilogy was designed as the conclusion of a long-form story about Bruce Wayne, his sacrifices, his failures, and ultimately his ability to let go. After the psychological intensity of Batman Begins and the moral chaos of The Dark Knight, Nolan returned with a film that expanded the scale dramatically while bringing the emotional journey of Bruce Wayne toward its final destination. The movie takes place 8 years after the devastating events of The Dark Knight. Gotham City appears to have entered an unusual period of peace. Crime has been suppressed, Harvey Dent has become a symbol of justice, and Batman has disappeared. Bruce Wayne, once the powerful and energetic owner of Wayne Enterprises, has withdrawn from society. His mansion has become quiet, his company is struggling, and the man behind the Batman identity has become almost a ghost. But Gotham's peace is not as secure as it appears. A new threat emerges in the form of Bane, a physically imposing and strategically brilliant revolutionary who believes that Gotham's social order must be destroyed. Unlike enemies who simply want money or personal revenge, Bane wants to break the city psychologically and politically. He intends to turn Gotham against itself and force Batman to confront the consequences of his own choices. This setup allows The Dark Knight Rises to become a story about more than Batman fighting another villain. It becomes a story about whether a broken man can rise again. The decision to return for a final chapter. One of the most interesting aspects of The Dark Knight Rises is that Christopher Nolan initially had reservations about making a third Batman film. After the enormous critical and commercial success of The Dark Knight, Nolan had already created a story that could have stood as a powerful conclusion. Returning to Gotham meant finding a reason for the story to continue without simply repeating the previous film. Nolan eventually agreed to return after developing a conclusion with his brother Jonathan Nolan and writer David S. Goyer. The goal was not merely to create another successful superhero blockbuster. The filmmakers wanted to finish Bruce Wayne's journey in a way that felt meaningful. That decision shaped almost every element of the movie. Instead of beginning immediately after The Dark Knight, the story jumps forward 8 years. This time gap is extremely important because it shows that Bruce has paid an enormous personal price for the role of Batman. He has sacrificed his physical health, his relationships, and his public identity. Rather than presenting him as an unstoppable superhero, the film introduces a Bruce Wayne who has almost completely disappeared from the world. The question is no longer whether Bruce Wayne can become Batman. The question is whether Bruce Wayne can become Bruce Wayne again. That distinction gives the final film an emotional purpose that separates it from the previous installments. Inspiration from Batman's comic book history. Nolan and his collaborators drew inspiration from several important Batman comic book storylines, particularly Nightfall, The Dark Knight Returns, and No Man's Land. The influence of Nightfall can be seen most clearly through Bane's role as the man capable of physically and psychologically defeating Batman. In the comics, Bane becomes famous for breaking Batman's body and forcing him into a desperate period of recovery. The Dark Knight Rises adapts that basic idea while giving it a larger cinematic context. The influence of The Dark Knight Returns can be seen in the older, physically damaged Batman who has spent years away from crime fighting. Bruce is no longer the young hero audiences saw at the beginning of Nolan's trilogy. He is older, exhausted, and uncertain whether he can continue. Meanwhile, No Man's Land contributes to the idea of Gotham becoming isolated and descending into chaos. Rather than copying these stories directly, Nolan combined their ideas with the themes established throughout his trilogy. The result was a Batman story that could function independently while also feeling connected to the mythology that came before it. Bruce Wayne, a hero who has lost his purpose. Christian Bale's performance is central to the film because Bruce Wayne begins the story in a very different emotional state. For years, Batman has been defined by discipline and determination. But now Bruce is living in isolation. His body has suffered years of punishment, and his emotional wounds have never truly healed. The tragedy of Bruce's situation is that he achieved what he thought he wanted. He stopped being Batman. Gotham became safer. Yet Bruce himself became miserable. This creates one of the film's most important ideas: sometimes achieving a goal does not automatically bring happiness. Bruce spent years believing that Batman was necessary because Gotham needed protection. But after Batman disappears, Bruce has no idea who he is without that mission. When Bane arrives, Bruce is forced back into the world he abandoned. At first, his decision to return is driven by instinct. He sees Gotham in danger and believes Batman must come back. But the film gradually reveals that Bruce's return is also deeply personal. He needs to discover whether he can still stand for something. His first confrontation with Bane proves devastating. Bane does not simply defeat Batman physically. He destroys Bruce's confidence. For perhaps the first time in Nolan's trilogy, Batman discovers an opponent who appears completely prepared for everything he can do. The defeat becomes the beginning of Bruce's transformation. Bane, a different kind of villain. Tom Hardy's Bane is one of the most physically intimidating antagonists in Nolan's trilogy, but his greatest weapon is not his strength. It is his ability to manipulate people. Bane understands fear, anger, social frustration, and symbolism. He recognizes that Gotham has weaknesses beneath its polished surface. Instead of attacking the city randomly, he systematically removes its defenses and turns its own population into part of the conflict. His physical presence immediately establishes him as a dangerous opponent. Yet Bane is not presented as a mindless brute. He is organized, patient, and capable of planning on a massive scale. His mask also contributes to his mysterious presence. Because much of his face is concealed, Hardy had to communicate emotion through his eyes, posture, movement, and voice. This creates an unusual screen presence. Bane does not need to shout constantly to appear threatening. His confidence does much of the work. He speaks as though he already knows how the story will end. That certainty becomes particularly disturbing when he defeats Batman. The fight is not presented as a simple action sequence. It represents the collapse of Bruce Wayne's identity. Batman has spent his life trying to become something stronger than an ordinary man. Bane proves that Batman can still be broken. Gotham under siege. Once Bane takes control of Gotham, the film expands from a personal Batman story into something resembling a large-scale social and political thriller. The city becomes isolated from the outside world. Its institutions collapse, its authorities lose control, and ordinary citizens are forced to confront an entirely new reality. This transformation allows Nolan to explore a recurring theme in his Batman trilogy, the relationship between fear and order. In Batman Begins, Gotham is threatened by fear and corruption. In The Dark Knight, the Joker attempts to prove that civilization is fragile. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bane takes that concept even further by creating a situation where Gotham's social structure essentially collapses. The city becomes a battlefield. The wealthy and powerful are exposed. The justice system is manipulated. People are forced to make choices without knowing whom they can trust. And Batman, the city's legendary protector, is absent. This creates one of the movie's most striking contrasts. At the beginning, Gotham appears peaceful because Batman has disappeared. Later, when Gotham needs Batman most, he is physically incapable of protecting it. The city must therefore survive without its greatest symbol. The arrival of Selina Kyle. And Hathaway's Selina Kyle adds another important dimension to the story. Rather than portraying Selina simply as a romantic partner or traditional superhero sidekick, the film presents her as a survivor. She is intelligent, resourceful, morally flexible, and constantly trying to escape a difficult life. Her relationship with Bruce is complicated because they are surprisingly similar. Both characters live behind identities. Both are shaped by painful experiences. Both have learned not to trust easily. And both are trying to escape their pasts. Selina initially sees Bruce as a wealthy and isolated man. Bruce sees Selina as someone whose criminal instincts make her unpredictable. Yet their relationship gradually becomes more meaningful. Selina's journey is also connected to the film's broader theme of redemption. She wants a chance to start over. Bruce eventually realizes that he wants the same thing. Their relationship therefore becomes more than a romance. It represents two damaged people discovering that they may be capable of living beyond the identities that have controlled them. John Blake and the idea of legacy. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's John Blake serves another important purpose. Blake is a young police officer who recognizes that Gotham's official version of history is not always the truth. He becomes increasingly aware that Batman represents something larger than the individual man beneath the mask. His character allows the movie to explore the idea of legacy. Batman cannot continue forever. Bruce Wayne is human. His body will eventually fail, and Gotham cannot depend on one person forever. Blake represents the possibility that the ideals associated with Batman can survive even if Bruce himself does not. This becomes especially important during the final stages of the film, when the audience begins to understand that the story is not simply about whether Batman can defeat Bane. It is about what Batman leaves behind, the emotional importance of Alfred. Michael Caine's Alfred is one of the emotional anchors of the trilogy. Throughout the films, Alfred has represented Bruce's connection to ordinary human life. He worries about Bruce not because Batman is ineffective, but because he knows what the role is doing to the man underneath the mask. In The Dark Knight Rises, Alfred becomes increasingly desperate to prevent Bruce from destroying himself. His concern is deeply personal. Alfred does not want to see Bruce die for Gotham. He wants Bruce to live. This difference is crucial. Bruce has spent years believing that sacrificing himself is the ultimate expression of heroism. Alfred challenges that belief. He tries to convince Bruce that there is a life beyond Batman. The emotional conflict between them is one of the film's strongest dramatic elements. Alfred understands something Bruce struggles to accept: saving Gotham does not necessarily require Bruce Wayne to sacrifice his entire existence. The Fall and the Rise. The title The Dark Knight Rises becomes especially meaningful after Bruce's defeat. Bane sends Batman into a prison where escape appears almost impossible. Bruce is forced to confront not only his physical weakness but also his psychological limitations. The prison becomes a metaphor for his entire life. Bruce is trapped by fear. He is trapped by guilt. He is trapped by the belief that Batman must eventually die. To escape, Bruce must rediscover the fear that originally motivated him. This creates an important reversal from the beginning of the trilogy. Young Bruce Wayne was afraid of bats and terrified by the idea of falling. Over time, he transformed that fear into his identity as Batman. But by the final film, Bruce has become so committed to Batman that he has forgotten how to live as Bruce Wayne. His journey through the prison forces him to confront that fear again. The lesson is not that fear should disappear. It is that fear can become a source of strength when it is understood rather than denied. The scale of the action. One of the defining characteristics of The Dark Knight Rises is its enormous scale. Nolan's previous Batman films were already large productions, but the final installment expands the action dramatically. The film includes massive street battles, aircraft sequences, explosions, vehicle chases, hand-to-hand combat, and large crowds. The action is not simply included because a superhero movie is expected to have action scenes. Each major sequence represents a development in Gotham's collapse or Bruce's transformation. The visual scale reinforces the idea that the final conflict is bigger than one man. Batman is fighting for an entire city. At the same time, the most memorable moments remain intensely personal. The physical fight between Batman and Bane is powerful because the audience understands what defeat means for Bruce. The final confrontation matters because it represents everything Bruce has spent years trying to accomplish. Nolan's use of IMAX. Christopher Nolan was known for his preference for large-format filmmaking, and The Dark Knight Rises continued that approach. Much of the film was shot using IMAX 70mm cameras, including the opening sequence. This decision helped give the movie an unusually large and detailed visual presentation. The use of IMAX was not merely a technical gimmick. Nolan wanted the scale of Gotham and its action sequences to feel physically immersive. Large-format photography allows enormous environments, crowds, vehicles, and landscapes to dominate the screen. For a film built around the idea of Gotham descending into chaos, that visual scale becomes part of the storytelling. The movie frequently shifts between intimate character moments and enormous action scenes. That contrast helps reinforce the difference between Bruce Wayne's private suffering and the public crisis facing Gotham. Building the Bat. The filmmakers also created new technology and vehicles specifically for the movie. One of the most recognizable additions was the Bat, an aircraft designed as a new evolution of Batman's technology. The vehicle was created to fit the grounded visual philosophy of Nolan's universe while still appearing futuristic. The film also expanded Batman's world with new sets, including a new Batcave and the underground prison environment. These production choices contributed to the feeling that the final chapter was not simply repeating the previous films. The world had changed. Batman had changed. Gotham had changed. The technology changed with them. Filming around the world. Production took place across several locations, including cities in the United Kingdom and the United States, as well as Jodhpur in India. The variety of filming locations helped Nolan create a world that felt larger than a single urban environment. Gotham itself was constructed from multiple real-world locations, allowing the city to feel recognizable but fictional. This approach was consistent with Nolan's filmmaking philosophy throughout the trilogy. Instead of relying entirely on computer-generated environments, the production frequently used practical locations, physical sets, and real vehicles. That commitment to physical filmmaking contributed to the grounded atmosphere that became one of the trilogy's defining characteristics. Marketing the final Batman story. The promotional campaign for The Dark Knight Rises began long before the movie reached theaters. Following the successful viral marketing campaign surrounding The Dark Knight, Warner Bros. Again used online material to build anticipation. Promotional websites, trailers, images, and other materials gradually revealed pieces of the movie without explaining everything. The marketing strategy benefited from the enormous popularity of Nolan's Batman films. Audiences were already curious about Bane, Batman's disappearance, and the future of Gotham. The filmmakers therefore had to balance giving audiences enough information to create excitement while keeping major story development secret. This mystery became an important part of the film's pre-release identity. People wanted to know how Batman would return. They wanted to know whether Bane could truly defeat him. And most importantly, they wanted to know how Nolan would end the trilogy. The 2012 premiere. The Dark Knight Rises premiered in New York City on July 16, 2012, before its wider release in the United States and United Kingdom on July 20. The film arrived under extraordinary expectations. Batman Begins had successfully reinvented the character for a modern audience. The Dark Knight had become one of the most acclaimed superhero films ever made. Therefore, the final installment faced the difficult task of satisfying audiences who expected not only spectacular action but also an emotionally meaningful conclusion. The response was largely positive. Critics praised the film's ambition, performances, action sequences, visual presentation, and ability to conclude the trilogy. At the same time, some reviewers considered the story dense and its political themes complicated. The movie attempted to combine a superhero narrative with elements of crime drama, political thriller, social commentary, and tragedy. That ambition inevitably created debate. But it also made the film distinctive. A major box office achievement. Commercially, The Dark Knight Rises became a major success. The film eventually earned more than $1 billion worldwide, making it the second Batman film to cross that enormous milestone. Its performance demonstrated just how powerful Nolan's trilogy had become. The success was particularly significant because the movie was not built simply around the novelty of Batman. It was the final chapter of a specific cinematic vision. Audiences were coming to see the conclusion of Bruce Wayne's story. The movie's financial performance therefore reflected not only the popularity of Batman but also the strength of the trilogy as a complete franchise. Critical recognition. The film also received awards attention, including a nomination for Special Visual Effects at the British Academy Film Awards. The American Film Institute included The Dark Knight Rises among its notable films of 2012. These recognitions reinforced the idea that Nolan's Batman trilogy had become an important part of modern blockbuster filmmaking. The movies demonstrated that superhero films could combine large-scale entertainment with serious dramatic themes. Rather than treating Batman as a simple fantasy character, Nolan's trilogy explored fear, morality, responsibility, sacrifice, corruption, justice, identity, and hope. The Dark Knight Rises brought those themes together for the final time. Why the ending matters. The ending is perhaps the most important aspect of the film because it changes the meaning of Bruce Wayne's entire journey. For years, Bruce believed that Batman had to exist forever. But the conclusion challenges that idea. A hero does not necessarily have to remain a symbol forever. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to step away. Bruce's final journey is therefore not about becoming a more powerful Batman. It is about becoming capable of living without Batman. That is why the title The Dark Knight Rises can be interpreted in more than one way. The Dark Knight literally rises again to confront Gotham's enemy. But Bruce Wayne also rises from emotional isolation. He rises from physical defeat. He rises from the belief that his life has no purpose beyond sacrifice. And eventually, he rises beyond Batman himself. The legacy of Nolan's trilogy. Looking at the trilogy as a whole, The Dark Knight Rises completes a carefully constructed character arc. In Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne becomes Batman because he wants to confront the fear and crime that destroyed his childhood. In The Dark Knight, Batman faces the moral consequences of his mission and discovers how difficult it is to protect Gotham without compromising its values. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce must determine whether he can finally move beyond the identity he created. The trilogy therefore begins with fear, moves through chaos, and ends with hope. That structure is one reason the final film remains significant. It is not simply a story about defeating a villain. It is the conclusion of Bruce Wayne's transformation. Final perspective. The Dark Knight Rises was an ambitious way to end one of the most influential superhero trilogies of its era. Christopher Nolan and his collaborators took elements from Batman's comic book history and transformed them into a large-scale cinematic conclusion. The film introduced a terrifying antagonist in Bane, expanded Gotham into a city on the edge of collapse, developed Selina Kyle into a complex character, introduced John Blake as a potential successor, and pushed Bruce Wayne further than he had ever been pushed. Its production reflected the same ambition. Real locations, large practical sets, IMAX photography, physical vehicles, extensive action sequences, and international filming all contributed to a sense of scale that matched the story's enormous stakes. But beneath the spectacle, the heart of the movie remains Bruce Wayne. He begins the story as a man who has lost his purpose. He has money, status, and a legendary history, yet he is emotionally trapped in the past. Bane's arrival forces him to confront everything he has avoided. He loses. He suffers. He doubts himself. And then he learns something he never fully understood before: strength is not simply the ability to endure punishment. True strength can also mean accepting fear, accepting vulnerability, and choosing to live. That idea ultimately gives the film its emotional power. Batman was created by Bruce Wayne, but by the end of the trilogy, Bruce discovers that he does not have to remain trapped inside the creation forever. The legacy of Batman can survive without Bruce constantly wearing the mask. Gotham can continue. Other people can carry the ideals forward. And Bruce Wayne can finally have a life. That is what makes The Dark Knight Rises more than a conventional superhero finale. It is a story about endings, sacrifice, identity, and the possibility of beginning again. The movie may be filled with enormous battles, collapsing buildings, powerful vehicles, and larger-than-life villains, but its most important conflict is internal. Can a man who spent his entire life preparing to die finally learn how to live? For Bruce Wayne, the answer becomes the ultimate victory. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises turns the final chapter of Bruce Wayne's story into a massive confrontation between hope and despair. The film does not simply ask whether Batman can defeat another dangerous villain. Instead, it places Gotham City itself on the brink of destruction and forces Bruce Wayne to confront the consequences of everything he has sacrificed. At the center of this story is Bane, a terrifying and highly intelligent enemy who combines physical power with military strategy. He does not arrive in Gotham simply to fight Batman. His goal is much larger. He wants to isolate the city, destroy its institutions, manipulate its people, and complete the mission originally associated with Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows. The result is a story in which Batman experiences his greatest defeat, Gotham experiences its darkest period, and Bruce Wayne is eventually forced to rediscover the reason he became Batman in the first place. A threat begins before Gotham even knows it exists. The film opens with an extraordinary operation far away from Gotham. Bane and his men attack a CIA aircraft carrying Dr. Leonid Pavel, a nuclear physicist whose knowledge is extremely valuable. The sequence immediately establishes something important about Bane: he is not an ordinary criminal. He operates like a military commander. His men are organized, disciplined, and prepared to manipulate the situation. Bane himself remains calm while everyone around him is confused and terrified. The opening operation also introduces the mysterious nature of Bane's larger plan. At first, it is not obvious why he needs Pavel or what he intends to do with him. That uncertainty is deliberate. Nolan allows the audience to understand that something enormous is being prepared before Gotham even becomes aware of the danger. Bane's introduction therefore creates suspense without immediately explaining everything. He is not simply a villain looking for attention. He is building toward something. 8 years of false peace. While Bane begins his operation, Gotham City appears to be enjoying an unusual period of stability. 8 years have passed since Harvey Dent's death. Crime has been dramatically reduced, organized criminal groups have been weakened, and Gotham's police department appears to have achieved something that once seemed impossible. But the peace is built on a lie. Commissioner James Gordon knows that Harvey Dent became a killer before his death. Gordon also knows that Batman took responsibility for Dent's crimes so that Gotham could preserve its faith in Dent as a symbol of justice. The Dent Act then becomes the foundation of Gotham's new order. This is one of the film's most important ideas. Gotham has peace, but that peace depends on a carefully protected falsehood. The city believes its institutions succeeded because of Harvey Dent. In reality, Batman and Gordon sacrificed their reputations to preserve hope. The Dark Knight Rises, released in 2012, is the third and final chapter of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, following Batman Begins from 2005 and The Dark Knight from 2008. Rather than functioning simply as another superhero adventure, the film was designed as the concluding chapter of a carefully constructed character journey. Its central question is not merely whether Batman can defeat another enemy, but whether Bruce Wayne can finally understand what Batman means, why he became Batman, and whether a life defined by sacrifice can eventually lead to something beyond sacrifice. Christopher Nolan directed the film and co-wrote the screenplay with his brother Jonathan Nolan. The story was developed by Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, and David S. Goyer, continuing the grounded interpretation of Batman established in the earlier films. The principal cast included Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne and Batman, Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth, Gary Oldman as Commissioner James Gordon, Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, Tom Hardy as Bane, and Hathaway as Selina Kyle, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as John Blake, and Marion Cotillard as Miranda Tate. The returning actors gave the trilogy continuity, while Hathaway, Hardy, Gordon-Levitt, and Cotillard introduced characters who significantly changed the emotional and dramatic landscape of Gotham. The movie was produced by Warner Brothers, Legendary Pictures, and Syncope, Nolan's production company. Nolan, Emma Thomas, and Charles Roven served as producers. Wally Pfister returned as cinematographer, Lee Smith handled editing, Nathan Crowley and Kevin Cavanaugh worked on production design, and Hans Zimmer returned to create the score. This continuity behind the camera was important because The Dark Knight Rises was intended to feel like the culmination of the same cinematic world rather than a new interpretation of Batman. The film had an enormous production budget of approximately $250 million. Box Office Mojo records a worldwide theatrical gross of approximately $1.085 billion, with about $448 million coming from the United States and Canada and roughly $637 million from international markets. Its opening domestic weekend was approximately $160.9 million. The film was released theatrically in the United States on July 20, 2012, following its July 16 premiere in New York City. Its runtime is approximately 164 minutes, making it the longest film in Nolan's Batman trilogy. The decision to make the final installment so large was deliberate. Nolan did not want the conclusion to feel like a smaller epilogue. The Dark Knight had transformed Batman from a successful comic book adaptation into a major cultural event, and expectations for the third movie were enormous. Nolan therefore constructed a story involving the collapse of Bruce Wayne's personal life, a major threat to Gotham, political instability, economic conflict, physical imprisonment, and the ultimate question of whether Batman could survive beyond Bruce Wayne's obsession. One of the most important production choices was Nolan's continued use of IMAX photography. The Dark Knight had famously used IMAX cameras for major sequences, but The Dark Knight Rises expanded their use. Nolan also avoided a digital intermediate, preserving much of the photographic character of the original film image. This decision contributed to the movie's unusually large-scale visual quality, particularly in theaters equipped for IMAX projection. Principal photography began in May 2011 and continued until November 2011. Filming took place across several countries and American cities. The production used Pittsburgh extensively to represent Gotham, while other locations included India, England, Scotland, and New York. Mahranger Fort in Jodhpur, Rajasthan, was used for material associated with the pit, while Chand Bowery in Rajasthan also appeared in the production. Wallerton Hall in Nottinghamshire represented Wayne Manor, and Pittsburgh locations provided many of Gotham's streets, buildings, and public spaces. The football stadium sequence demonstrates the enormous physical scale of the production. Heinz Field in Pittsburgh was transformed into Gotham's football stadium, and Pittsburgh Steelers players appeared as members of the fictional Gotham Rogues. More than 11,000 extras were reportedly used for the football sequence. The casting of Tom Hardy as Bane was particularly significant. After Heath Ledger's extraordinary performance as the Joker in The Dark Knight, Nolan faced an obvious challenge. How could the final movie introduce a villain who would not simply appear to be a weaker copy of the Joker? Bane provided a completely different kind of threat. The Joker destabilized Gotham psychologically and philosophically. Bane threatens it through physical strength, organization, political manipulation, and strategic control. Hardy's performance depended heavily on physicality because much of Bane's face is concealed behind his mask. Instead of relying primarily on facial expression, Hardy used posture, movement, rhythm, voice, and body language. Bane's unusual vocal delivery became one of the most discussed elements of the film. His voice was deliberately distinctive, creating the impression of a highly educated but terrifying figure whose physical power was matched by intellectual confidence. And Hathaway's casting as Selina Kyle was another important decision. Rather than presenting Catwoman as a straightforward villain, the film places Selina in a morally uncertain position. She is motivated by survival, independence, and personal opportunity. Hathaway's performance became one of the most positively discussed aspects of the film because she managed to combine humor, elegance, danger, vulnerability, and emotional complexity. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was cast as John Blake, a young police officer who represents a new generation within Gotham's law enforcement. His character allows the movie to explore what happens when older institutions begin to fail and younger people are forced to inherit responsibility. Marion Cotillard plays Miranda Tate, a wealthy businesswoman who becomes involved with Wayne Enterprises. Her presence connects Bruce's personal world with the broader economic conflict surrounding Gotham. Morgan Freeman and Gary Oldman return as Lucius Fox and Commissioner Gordon, while Michael Caine once again provides the emotional heart of the trilogy through Alfred. The film's marketing was carefully controlled. Nolan and Warner Brothers maintained considerable secrecy around the plot. Promotional material emphasized Bane, Batman's physical defeat, Gotham's destruction, and the idea that this was the end of the legend. The famous promotional phrase, "The legend ends," reinforced the sense that audiences were witnessing the conclusion of a complete story rather than merely another sequel. The film also became associated with a terrible real-world tragedy. During a midnight screening in Aurora, Colorado. On July 20, 2012, a gunman attacked moviegoers, killing 12 people and injuring many others. The tragedy had no connection to the film's production, but it profoundly affected its opening period and became part of the historical context surrounding the movie's release. Warner Brothers cancelled some promotional appearances and the cast and filmmakers publicly expressed their condolences. Despite this tragedy, the film achieved extraordinary commercial success. It became the second Batman film to cross the $1 billion worldwide threshold and was among the highest-grossing films of 2012. Box Office Mojo currently records approximately $1.085 billion worldwide. Critical reception was generally positive. Rotten Tomatoes currently lists the film at 87% from critics and 90% from verified audience ratings, with the consensus describing it as an ambitious and thoughtful conclusion to Nolan's franchise. The movie received numerous awards and nominations. It earned a BAFTA nomination for special visual effects, competing against films including Life of Pi, The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, Marvel's The Avengers, and Prometheus. The film also accumulated recognition from genre organizations and critics groups. IMDb's awards record lists dozens of wins and nominations, including recognition for Anne Hathaway, Hans Zimmer's music, visual effects, action, and other technical achievements. One interesting behind-the-scenes fact concerns the Joker. There was discussion about whether previously unused material involving Heath Ledger could potentially be incorporated into the final film. Nolan ultimately rejected the idea because he considered it inappropriate to manipulate Ledger's existing performance merely to include the character. This decision reveals something fundamental about Nolan's approach. The Dark Knight Rises was not intended to depend on nostalgia. Instead of bringing back the Joker, Nolan created a completely different final challenge for Bruce Wayne. The trilogy therefore concludes on its own terms. The cultural impact of the movie is considerable. Nolan's trilogy helped redefine expectations for superhero cinema by treating Batman as a serious crime drama, political thriller, psychological character study, and large-scale action film. The Dark Knight Rises completed that transformation. It demonstrated that a superhero franchise could be structured like a literary trilogy, with recurring themes, evolving characters, visual motifs, and a deliberate ending. Its legacy is therefore larger than its box office. The movie helped establish the idea that a superhero story could have a genuine conclusion. It also influenced later discussions about grounded superhero storytelling, moral ambiguity, practical effects, large-format photography, and the value of treating comic book mythology with dramatic seriousness. 2. Detailed plot explanation, story structure, character arcs, and narrative technique. The Dark Knight Rises begins after a significant passage of time. Gotham is no longer the city seen at the end of The Dark Knight. The consequences of Harvey Dent's death have reshaped the city's political and social environment, while Bruce Wayne has withdrawn almost completely from public life. This opening decision is essential because Nolan does not begin with Batman at the height of his abilities. Instead, the protagonist is already broken. Bruce Wayne has physically survived the previous film, but psychologically he has stopped moving forward. His decision to disappear reflects the central paradox of his character. Batman was created because Bruce could not accept helplessness, yet becoming Batman eventually leaves him trapped inside the trauma that created him. The Wayne scene at the beginning of this movie is therefore not simply older. He is emotionally frozen. The first major structural purpose of the opening act is to establish the false peace of Gotham. The city appears safer because the Batman legend has disappeared and the Dent Act has supposedly helped reduce organized crime. But the peace is fragile because it depends partly on a hidden lie. Commissioner Gordon knows the truth about Harvey Dent. He knows that Batman accepted responsibility for Dent's crimes in order to protect Gotham's faith in its institutions. This creates an ethical problem that eventually becomes one of the movie's central conflicts. Nolan repeatedly asks whether a society can be protected by a lie if revealing the truth would destroy public confidence. The arrival of Bane changes everything. Bane is introduced through a striking sequence involving an airplane. The scene immediately establishes his capabilities. He is not merely physically powerful, he commands people, understands systems, manipulates authority, and thinks several steps ahead. This is important because the film does not frame Bane as a random criminal. He represents organized force. The contrast between Batman and Bane becomes immediately clear. Batman is one man operating through secrecy. Bane is a leader who creates a movement. The movie then introduces Selina Kyle. Her first major appearance emphasizes her ability to manipulate social expectations. She is a thief, but she is also a survivor. She understands that wealthy people often protect themselves behind assumptions about respectability. Selina's role is particularly interesting because she does not initially possess Bruce's moral commitment. She wants freedom. She wants security. She wants to escape the consequences of her past. Yet this apparent selfishness becomes the beginning of her character development. Bruce's encounter with Selina eventually leads him back toward the world he abandoned. He begins investigating the new threat to Gotham, and this gradually brings Batman back into the story. The transition is intentionally uncomfortable. Batman is not immediately restored to his former condition. Bruce is physically weakened and psychologically damaged. His body has suffered years of abuse, and his isolation has made him less capable of understanding the world around him. This creates an unusual superhero narrative because the hero's comeback is not presented as effortless. When Batman finally confronts Bane, the movie deliberately refuses to give audiences the expected victory. Bane defeats him. This moment is crucial because it destroys Bruce's belief that determination alone is enough. Throughout the trilogy, Bruce has survived through preparation, fear, technology, and willpower. Bane exposes the limitations of those qualities. The physical defeat becomes a psychological defeat. Bruce is taken to the pit, a prison designed around an almost mythological concept of escape. The prison represents the opposite of Gotham. Gotham is a giant city filled with technology, wealth, police, and infrastructure. The pit is stripped down to survival. The story now separates Bruce from Batman. That distinction is one of the most important elements of the entire trilogy. Bruce has spent his life believing that Batman is his strength. In the pit, he is forced to confront the possibility that Batman is actually the identity that has prevented him from living. The escape challenge becomes symbolic. Bruce initially attempts to escape through sheer physical effort, but he fails. His body is strong enough to survive extraordinary punishment, yet his mind remains trapped by fear. The film therefore returns to one of the fundamental ideas introduced in Batman Begins: fear must be confronted rather than merely suppressed. Meanwhile, Gotham is taken over by Bane. The city's institutions collapse. The police are trapped. Ordinary citizens become caught in an atmosphere of uncertainty. Bane's control of Gotham is not merely military. It is theatrical. He understands that controlling a population requires controlling its story. This connects the film directly to Commissioner Gordon's earlier decision to conceal the truth about Harvey Dent. Gotham's entire political order has been built partly on a carefully managed narrative. Bane then creates a new narrative, one in which Gotham's existing social structure is condemned. The movie deliberately presents contradictions in Bane's rhetoric. He speaks about liberation while imposing absolute control. He claims to destroy privilege while exercising enormous authority himself. This ambiguity is one of the film's strongest political ideas. The middle section of the story focuses heavily on time. Bane creates a situation in which Gotham citizens know that catastrophe is approaching, but they do not know exactly how or when it will happen. This creates psychological pressure. Time has always been important in Nolan's films. In The Dark Knight Rises, time becomes almost a character. Bruce has spent years wasting time. Gotham believes it has secured peace. Bane creates a countdown. The film therefore transforms time into a measure of responsibility. John Blake becomes increasingly important during this stage. He is younger than Gordon and represents a new generation of law enforcement. Unlike many officers who depend completely on institutional authority, Blake is willing to trust his instincts. His relationship with Gordon creates an interesting generational contrast. Gordon represents the old system that has protected Gotham through compromise. Blake represents a younger approach based on direct moral judgment. The film's final movement eventually brings Bruce back into the story. But his return is different from his earlier appearance as Batman. He is no longer fighting merely to prove that he can survive. He is fighting because Gotham needs someone to act. This distinction is essential. The film's climax combines multiple storylines: Bruce's personal struggle, Gordon's guilt, Selina's moral transformation, Blake's growth, Lucius Fox's technological responsibilities, and Gotham's fight for survival. Nolan structures the climax as a convergence of character arcs rather than simply an action spectacle. Batman must learn sacrifice. Selina must decide what kind of person she wants to be. Gordon must confront the consequences of his silence. Blake must determine what justice means after Batman. Lucius must confront the dangerous potential of technology. Alfred must decide whether protecting Bruce means supporting Batman or saving Bruce from Batman. The emotional climax therefore exists alongside the physical climax. Michael Caine's performance as Alfred is particularly important. Alfred's fear is one of the few things Bruce cannot dismiss. Throughout the trilogy, Alfred functions as Bruce's emotional conscience. He understands that Batman may save Gotham while destroying Bruce. When Alfred finally challenges Bruce, the conflict becomes deeply personal. Alfred does not oppose Batman because he believes Bruce is weak. He opposes Batman because he believes Bruce deserves a life. That distinction makes their conflict emotionally powerful. The ending then moves beyond the immediate question of whether Gotham survives. The film asks what happens after the symbol is no longer necessary. This is where The Dark Knight Rises completes the trilogy. Batman Begins asks how Batman is created. The Dark Knight asks what Batman means when confronted by chaos. The Dark Knight Rises asks whether Batman can eventually become unnecessary. That is why the title is so important. The phrase "rises" does not only refer to Batman physically standing again after defeat. It refers to the idea of rising beyond trauma, fear, guilt, and obsession. The movie's final emotional meaning therefore depends on transformation rather than victory. The narrative is deliberately circular. Bruce begins the trilogy as a traumatized child trapped by his parents' death. He becomes Batman as an attempt to confront fear. He eventually becomes trapped inside Batman. The final film asks him to confront fear once again, but this time the fear is not becoming Batman. The fear is becoming something else. That makes the trilogy's conclusion surprisingly human. 3. In-depth critical review and analysis. Christopher Nolan's direction in The Dark Knight Rises is ambitious, confident, and occasionally excessive. The film attempts to combine superhero spectacle, political thriller, crime drama, psychological character study, science fiction technology, and epic tragedy. At its best, this combination gives the movie enormous scale and emotional weight. At its weakest, the sheer number of storylines makes the narrative feel crowded. The direction succeeds particularly well in making Gotham feel like a real city. Nolan avoids presenting Gotham as a purely comic book environment. Instead, the city resembles a combination of New York, Chicago, London, and other major urban centers. This grounding makes the destruction of Gotham more disturbing because the audience recognizes the environment as something resembling the real world. The football stadium sequence is a perfect example. It begins as a celebration and suddenly becomes terrifying. The scale of the crowd makes the threat feel enormous. Nolan's preference for practical photography and large-format cinematography allows the sequence to feel physical rather than artificially constructed. The cinematography by Wally Pfister is another major strength. The movie frequently uses large architectural spaces to emphasize human vulnerability. Buildings, tunnels, bridges, stadiums, prisons, and streets are presented as enormous environments in which individual characters appear relatively small. This visual strategy reflects the film's central idea: Bruce Wayne is powerful, but he is still only one human being. The use of IMAX photography contributes greatly to this effect. Large-format images make Gotham feel monumental. The difference is particularly noticeable during aerial sequences and large-scale action scenes. The production design by Nathan Crowley and his team also deserves significant attention. Wayne Manor, the Batcave, the Pit, Gotham streets, Bane's underground operations, and the various corporate environments all have distinct visual identities. The Pit is especially effective because it feels simultaneously physical and symbolic. It resembles a prison, but it also resembles a mythological underworld. Bruce must descend before he can rise. Hans Zimmer's score is arguably one of the most recognizable elements of the movie. Zimmer expands musical ideas from the previous films while creating new motifs for Bane and the larger conflict. The music is frequently overwhelming, using percussion, chanting, rising patterns, and deep electronic textures. The musical design creates a sense of inevitability. When Bane's presence dominates a scene, the score often feels less like traditional background music and more like an approaching force. This is especially effective because Bane himself is often difficult to understand verbally. The music helps communicate his power even when dialogue is sparse. The editing by Lee Smith is more controversial. The film contains a very large amount of narrative material. Bruce Wayne's personal crisis, Bane's rise, Selina's story, Gordon's guilt, Blake's investigation, Miranda Tate's role, Lucius Fox's technology, and Gotham's political collapse all need screen time. At nearly 164 minutes, the movie is long, but the length is understandable because Nolan is attempting to conclude multiple character arcs simultaneously. Still, some transitions are abrupt. Certain developments occur faster than the emotional preparation might suggest. Some relationships feel as though they could have benefited from additional scenes. The film's desire to reach its large-scale climax sometimes compresses quieter character moments. The screenplay by Christopher and Jonathan Nolan is thematically ambitious. One of its greatest strengths is its interest in contradictions. Bane talks about freedom while imposing dictatorship. Gotham celebrates justice while depending on a lie. Bruce Wayne wants to protect people while repeatedly putting himself in danger. Selina wants freedom while becoming entangled in a larger moral conflict. Gordon wants to preserve Gotham while carrying guilt over the methods used to do so. These contradictions prevent the movie from becoming a simple battle between good and evil. Christian Bale's performance is central to the trilogy. His Bruce Wayne is much less outwardly energetic in this film than in Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. That is intentional. Bruce is exhausted. He has lost his sense of purpose. Bale communicates this through posture and physical restraint. The Bruce Wayne of the opening is almost a ghost. He has wealth but no meaningful life. He has a mansion but no family. He has survived but has not actually lived. This makes his eventual transformation more meaningful. Tom Hardy's Bane is one of the movie's most controversial elements but also one of its most memorable. Hardy's performance relies heavily on voice and physical presence. His unusual speech pattern initially divided audiences because his dialogue can be difficult to understand. However, the voice contributes to Bane's identity. The character sounds controlled rather than emotional. Even when he threatens someone, he often speaks with calm confidence. This makes him feel different from the Joker. The Joker was unpredictable. Bane is predictable in a more frightening way. He appears to know exactly what he wants. And Hathaway's Selina Kyle is arguably the film's greatest surprise. Hathaway avoids playing Selina as a simple seductive criminal. Instead, she gives the character humor and vulnerability. Selina's body language constantly changes according to her surroundings. She can appear confident in one scene and frightened in another. This makes her morally complicated without making her emotionally inaccessible. Her chemistry with Bale is also effective because Bruce and Selina represent opposing responses to wealth. Bruce inherited enormous wealth but rejects ordinary life. Selina understands wealth primarily as something that determines survival and social power. Their relationship therefore functions as both romance and ideological conflict. Joseph Gordon-Levitt provides a grounded performance as Blake. His character is important because he represents the possibility of Gotham's future after Bruce. Gary Oldman gives Gordon considerable emotional weight. Gordon is a character who has spent years convincing himself that his decision was necessary. His eventual confrontation with the consequences of that decision gives the film a strong emotional foundation. Michael Caine is particularly powerful. Alfred's scenes are among the most emotionally effective in the entire trilogy because they strip away superhero mythology and reduce the story to a guardian begging someone he loves to stop destroying himself. Marion Cotillard's performance is more difficult to evaluate because the screenplay gives her character a major narrative purpose that depends heavily on later revelations. Without discussing major twists, it can be said that her role is closely connected to the film's ideas about legacy, wealth, identity, and revenge. The dialogue is one of the movie's defining characteristics. Nolan's characters often speak in philosophical terms. They discuss fear, freedom, pain, justice, and social order. Some viewers find this powerful. Others find it overly direct. The film occasionally explains an idea that the visuals have already communicated. Nolan sometimes trusts dialogue more than subtle implication. This is particularly noticeable when characters discuss Bane's philosophy or Gotham's political condition. Nevertheless, the dialogue contributes to the film's distinctive intellectual identity. The action direction is another major strength. The first Batman-Bane confrontation is deliberately brutal. It lacks the elegant rhythm of a conventional superhero fight. Instead, it resembles a contest between two heavyweights. Batman is accustomed to controlling fights through speed and surprise. Bane absorbs that strategy and overwhelms him through strength and discipline. The later large-scale battles have a different character. They resemble urban warfare more than conventional superhero combat. This contributes to Nolan's grounded approach. The film's pacing is arguably its biggest weakness. At 164 minutes, The Dark Knight Rises demands patience. The first act spends considerable time establishing Gotham's political situation and Bruce's withdrawal. The middle act then slows dramatically during Bruce's imprisonment. For viewers expecting constant Batman action, this can feel frustrating. But the slower sections are necessary for the character arc. If Bruce escaped the pit quickly, his transformation would feel unearned. The movie needs him to experience helplessness. Compared with Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises is less intimate. Batman Begins is primarily about one man's transformation. Compared with The Dark Knight, it is less psychologically concentrated. The Dark Knight revolves around the conflict between Batman and Joker. The Dark Knight Rises is broader. It is an epic conclusion. That difference explains both its strengths and weaknesses. The Dark Knight may be tighter as an individual film, but The Dark Knight Rises has the difficult responsibility of completing a trilogy. The movie also differs from superhero films built around spectacle alone. Its central concern remains character. Even the largest action sequences are connected to Bruce's psychological journey. That is why the film remains emotionally effective despite its structural imperfections. For themes, symbolism and deeper meaning. The deepest theme in The Dark Knight Rises is the relationship between fear and freedom. Fear has defined Bruce Wayne's entire life. As a child, he fears bats. After witnessing his parents' murder, he fears helplessness. He creates Batman to confront that fear. But eventually Batman becomes another prison. This creates the central paradox of Bruce's character. The identity he created to become free from fear gradually becomes the identity that prevents him from living freely. The pit therefore becomes one of the film's most important symbols. Bruce is literally imprisoned, but his physical prison reflects a psychological prison he has carried for years. The only way to escape is not simply to become stronger. He must rediscover fear. This is why the escape challenge has such importance. Bruce initially believes that fear is something to eliminate. But the film suggests that fear can provide motivation and meaning. A person who has nothing to lose may become reckless. A person who understands that life can be lost may finally learn to value it. This leads directly to the second major theme, sacrifice. Batman has always been built around sacrifice. Bruce sacrifices his wealth, relationships, identity, and physical safety. But The Dark Knight Rises questions whether endless sacrifice is actually noble. There is a difference between sacrificing yourself for others and destroying yourself because you believe you deserve punishment. Bruce's journey suggests that the latter is not heroism. It is unresolved trauma. This is why Alfred's opposition to Batman is so important. Alfred understands that Bruce has transformed grief into a permanent lifestyle. The film therefore reframes heroism. True heroism is not necessarily dying for people. Sometimes heroism means allowing yourself to live. The concept of legacy is another major theme. The trilogy begins with Bruce trying to become a symbol. By the end, the question becomes whether the symbol can survive without the man. Batman is larger than Bruce Wayne. The character has become a myth. This raises a philosophical question. Does a symbol belong to the person who created it, or does it eventually belong to society? The answer suggested by the film is that symbols can outlive individuals. This is why the ending is emotionally important without needing to rely solely on spectacle. The idea of legacy also applies to Gotham's institutions. Commissioner Gordon's generation created a system that appears successful but depends on secrecy. Blake's generation inherits that system and must decide what to do with it. This is a broader metaphor for political institutions. Every generation inherits decisions made by previous generations. Some decisions protect society. Others create hidden problems that eventually return. The Harvey Dent story represents this perfectly. Gotham's peace is built partly on a simplified version of the truth. The film does not suggest that lying is always acceptable. Instead, it asks whether a society can remain stable when its stability depends on an uncomfortable secret. Bane exploits this weakness. His revolution is another example of a narrative being used as a weapon. He tells Gotham a story about liberation and corruption. The film therefore treats political power as partly a battle over narrative. Whoever controls the story can influence how people understand justice. The movie also examines class. Selina Kyle lives in a completely different economic reality. Bane exploits class resentment. He presents Gotham's wealthy elite as symbols of injustice and uses public anger to justify radical action. Yet the film avoids presenting Bane's revolution as genuine liberation. The result is a complicated political message. Economic inequality can produce resentment. Resentment can produce instability. But destroying institutions does not automatically create freedom. The film's view of revolution is therefore deeply skeptical. Bane's rhetoric about giving Gotham back to its people eventually becomes another form of control. This connects to one of the trilogy's most important ideas: people can be manipulated by both fear and hope. The Joker manipulates through chaos. Bane manipulates through certainty. The Joker tells people that the world is meaningless. Bane tells people that he knows exactly what the world should become. Both approaches threaten individual freedom. Selina Kyle provides a counter-argument. She begins the film primarily concerned with herself. She wants to escape her circumstances. But her character arc suggests that freedom is not simply the absence of responsibility. Real freedom may require choosing responsibility. This is a significant transformation because Selina's worldview begins with survival and gradually moves toward moral choice. She does not become a completely different person. She remains practical, skeptical, and independent. But she learns that survival without purpose is insufficient. The film's symbolism around rising and falling is equally important. Bruce falls from wealth into isolation. Batman falls physically and psychologically. Gotham falls into chaos. But these falls are necessary before reconstruction can occur. The title therefore works at several levels. Batman rises. Bruce rises. Gotham rises. A new generation rises. The metaphor is ultimately about transformation. The film also repeatedly uses fire and darkness. Darkness has always represented Batman's environment. But in this movie, darkness is no longer simply where Batman operates. It becomes something Bruce must emerge from. The final movement therefore changes the meaning of darkness. Batman began as a creature of darkness. The conclusion suggests that Bruce can move beyond it. The mask is another important symbol. The mask protects Bruce's identity, but it also hides him from emotional intimacy. Throughout the trilogy, the mask serves two functions. It protects Gotham. It protects Bruce. But protection can become isolation. The film's final ideas therefore revolve around removing unnecessary barriers. Bruce must eventually understand that he does not need to remain imprisoned inside the identity he created. Another major theme is identity. Bruce Wayne and Batman are not simply two personalities. They represent two competing ideas about responsibility. Bruce is the wounded individual. Batman is the public symbol. The trilogy repeatedly asks which one is real. The final answer is deliberately more complex than either option. Batman is real because people believe in what he represents. Bruce is real because he experiences pain, love, fear, and hope. The best solution is therefore not to choose one over the other but to understand that the symbol can exist without consuming the individual. This is also why the movie's conclusion feels different from a conventional superhero ending. The hero does not simply win and return to normal. The hero's definition of victory changes. The deeper meaning of The Dark Knight Rises is therefore not that Batman is stronger than his enemies. It is that Bruce Wayne eventually understands that he is more than his trauma. That is the real rise. 5. Final verdict and recommendation. The Dark Knight Rises is an ambitious conclusion to one of the most influential superhero trilogies ever produced. It is not a flawless movie, and its imperfections become more visible when examined closely. The screenplay is crowded, some character developments feel compressed, several political ideas are presented with more directness than subtlety, and the pacing can be demanding. Yet those weaknesses should be considered alongside the extraordinary difficulty of what the film attempts to accomplish. Christopher Nolan was not simply making another Batman sequel. He was closing a 9-hour narrative about trauma, fear, justice, responsibility, sacrifice, and identity. That context matters. As an individual film, The Dark Knight remains more tightly constructed. Its central conflict is cleaner, its pacing is more controlled, and its psychological confrontation between Batman and the Joker is unusually focused. But The Dark Knight Rises has a different purpose. It is an ending. Its greatest achievement is therefore not individual perfection but thematic completion. The film returns to ideas established in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight and transforms them. Fear, which originally created Batman, becomes something Bruce must understand differently. The lie surrounding Harvey Dent, introduced as a necessary sacrifice, eventually becomes a source of moral tension. The Batman identity, originally created as a weapon against crime, becomes something Bruce must eventually release. This creates a satisfying circular structure. Batman Begins asks how a frightened child becomes Batman. The Dark Knight asks what Batman's existence costs Gotham and Bruce. The Dark Knight Rises asks whether Bruce can finally live after Batman. That progression gives the trilogy a sense of purpose that many franchises lack. Christian Bale's performance is one of the strongest reasons to revisit the movie. His portrayal of Bruce evolves significantly across the trilogy. In Batman Begins, he is a young man searching for direction. In The Dark Knight, he is a confident but increasingly isolated hero. In The Dark Knight Rises, he is exhausted and emotionally damaged. Bale makes these differences visible. And Hathaway is another major reason for the film's lasting appeal. Selina Kyle is funny, dangerous, vulnerable, intelligent, and morally unpredictable. Hathaway gives the character a level of personality that prevents her from being reduced to a romantic accessory. Tom Hardy's Bane remains divisive, particularly because of the voice and some of the character's dialogue. Nevertheless, the physical presence and performance are unforgettable. Bane feels like an enemy designed specifically to break Batman rather than merely challenge him. Michael Caine's Alfred provides the trilogy with its emotional center. Whenever the film returns to Alfred and Bruce, the superhero spectacle becomes secondary. The audience is reminded that Batman is not merely an idea. He is a human being who is loved by someone. That emotional foundation makes the final act considerably more powerful. Hans Zimmer's music also gives the movie an enormous sense of scale. The score is not subtle, but subtlety is not always the objective. The music creates a feeling of historical significance, as though Gotham's conflict has become larger than the individuals involved. Wally Pfister's cinematography remains one of the movie's strongest technical achievements. The large-format photography and practical production methods give the film physical presence that remains impressive years after release. The movie's action scenes also retain their power because many of them feel tangible. The first confrontation between Batman and Bane is particularly effective because it reverses the expected superhero dynamic. Batman is not effortlessly superior. He is overwhelmed. This matters because victory later has greater meaning precisely because defeat was real. The film's greatest weakness remains its density. There are moments when the screenplay seems to be carrying too many ideas at once. The political storyline, Bane's plan, Bruce's personal transformation, Selina's arc, Gordon's guilt, Blake's development, Lucius's technology, and the various revelations all compete for attention. Some viewers will consider this richness. Others will experience it as overstuffing. Both reactions are understandable. The movie is also deliberately serious. There is relatively little of the playful humor found in many modern superhero films. Even Selina's humor generally exists within the dramatic atmosphere. For viewers who prefer lighter superhero entertainment, this can make the movie feel heavy. For viewers who enjoy dramatic, philosophical, and visually ambitious filmmaking, the seriousness is one of its greatest attractions. The film also has strong rewatch value. On a first viewing, attention naturally focuses on the action and mystery. On subsequent viewings, the character relationships become more important. Bruce and Alfred's relationship becomes more tragic. Gordon's guilt becomes more understandable. Selina's choices become more meaningful. Bane's manipulation becomes easier to recognize. The repeated references to fear, rising, falling, and legacy become clearer. The movie therefore benefits from knowing where its emotional journey is heading. It is especially recommended for viewers who enjoy superhero films that function as character dramas rather than straightforward action movies. It is also ideal for audiences interested in Christopher Nolan's filmmaking style, large-format cinematography, practical effects, philosophical storytelling, Hans Zimmer's scoring, and ambitious trilogy structures. Viewers who have already watched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight will gain considerably more from The Dark Knight Rises because many of its emotional moments depend on knowledge of the previous films. Watching the trilogy in order is therefore strongly recommended. My overall rating is 9 out of 10. The rating is not based on the idea that the movie is technically perfect. It is based on the total achievement. The film combines extraordinary performances, large-scale action, powerful music, striking cinematography, memorable production design, ambitious themes, and a meaningful conclusion. Its imperfections are real. But they are largely the imperfections of a movie attempting something unusually ambitious. The Dark Knight Rises also deserves recognition for helping establish that superhero stories can have endings that are about more than defeating the villain. The movie's final message is about moving forward. Bruce Wayne's greatest achievement is ultimately not defeating Bane. It is escaping the psychological prison that has defined him for most of his life. Batman begins as an answer to fear. Batman becomes a symbol of hope. And eventually, Bruce discovers that the symbol does not need to destroy the man behind it. That is why the movie's final emotional effect can remain powerful even after its mysteries and action sequences are familiar. The title, The Dark Knight Rises, therefore describes more than a superhero returning to combat. It describes a human being recovering the ability to live. It describes a city recovering from fear. It describes a younger generation inheriting responsibility. And it describes a legend becoming something larger than the person who created it. For viewers interested in a serious, visually ambitious, emotionally driven superhero epic, The Dark Knight Rises is highly recommended. For viewers looking for a fast, uncomplicated action movie, its long runtime, political ideas, philosophical dialogue, and multiple character arcs may feel demanding. But for anyone willing to engage with the film as the conclusion of a larger story, its ambition becomes one of its greatest strengths. The Dark Knight Rises is ultimately a film about endings that become beginnings. It asks whether a person can stop living inside the past. It asks whether society can survive the truth. It asks whether symbols can outlive their creators. And most importantly, it asks whether sacrifice has meaning if the person making the sacrifice never allows themselves the possibility of happiness. The answer offered by the film is hopeful. The past cannot always be changed. Fear cannot always be eliminated. Loss cannot always be repaired. But a person can choose what happens next. That idea gives The Dark Knight Rises its lasting emotional power and makes it a fitting conclusion to Nolan's Batman trilogy. In the end, the movie is not simply about Batman rising again. Release details: The Dark Knight Rises had its world premiere at AMC Lincoln Square in New York City on July 16, 2012, and went into wide release in the United States and United Kingdom on July 20, 2012. It was distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures and co-produced by Legendary Pictures, Syncope and DC Entertainment. The runtime is 164 minutes and 59 seconds, rated PG-13 for intense sequences of violence and action, some sensuality and language. It was released in IMAX, 35mm and 70mm, with over 72 minutes of the film shot in IMAX 65mm, a record at the time. Development and production history. After The Dark Knight became a cultural and box office phenomenon in 2008, Warner Brothers immediately wanted a third film. Christopher Nolan was hesitant. He has said repeatedly that he does not want to make a film unless he has a story worth telling, and he did not want to repeat himself. The core story was broken by Nolan and David S. Goyer during the winter of 2010, built around two ideas: what happens years after a hero disappears, and how do you craft an ending for Bruce Wayne that feels earned. Jonathan Nolan then joined to write the screenplay with Christopher. 3 comic arcs were foundational. The first was The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, particularly the idea of an older, broken Bruce coming back. The second was Nightfall, where Bane breaks Batman's back. The third was No Man's Land, where Gotham is cut off from the rest of America and falls into anarchy. Nolan deliberately avoided using the Joker again after Heath Ledger's death, calling it out of respect and because the story was moving toward a different kind of villainy, not chaos but ideology and brute force. Pre-production began in early 2011. Principal photography ran from May to November 2011 across 5 countries. Pittsburgh stood in for Gotham City exteriors, with Heinz Field used for the football stadium collapse sequence. New York was used again for Wall Street and Trump Tower as Wayne Tower. Los Angeles provided interiors at Warner Brothers Studios. The UK shoot at Cardington and Wallerton Hall, which doubled as Wayne Manor, handled the Batcave and many interiors. The most logistically complex shoot was in Jodhpur, India, at Maharanger Fort, which became the Pit Prison. Casting decisions. Christian Bale returned as Bruce Wayne as Batman for a reported $15 million plus backend. His contract ended with this film. And Hathaway as Selina Kyle as Catwoman was controversial at first. Fans were skeptical after her casting announcement in January 2011. Nolan cast her after seeing her audition where she understood Selina not as a vixen but as a survivor and con artist. She studied Hedy Lamarr and classic heist films and did most of her own stunts in the catsuit designed by Lindy Hemming. Tom Hardy as Bane was a reunion with Nolan after Inception. Hardy gained 30 pounds of muscle, and his casting redefined the character. In the comics, Bane is often a luchador-style brute. Here Nolan and costume designer Lindy Hemming gave him a military surplus coat, a vest, and a mask that is not a wrestling mask but a pain management device that feeds anesthetic gas after injuries from an early prison attack. Hardy's voice, that oddly articulate, almost aristocratic accent mixed with physical menace, was his own creation and became iconic and divisive. Other major returns: Michael Caine as Alfred, Gary Oldman as Commissioner Gordon, Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. New additions: Joseph Gordon-Levitt as John Blake, a composite of Robin and a grounded cop who represents idealism, Marion Cotillard as Miranda Tate Italia Ul Ghul, returning to Nolan after Inception, and Matthew Modine, Ben Mendelsohn, and Josh Pence. Budget and technical feats. The official gross budget was $250 to $300 million, with net around $230 million after tax credits. That made it one of the most expensive films ever made at that time. Cinematographer Wally Pfister shot on 35mm anamorphic plus IMAX MSM 9802 cameras. Nolan refused to shoot in 3D, insisting that IMAX film was the premium format. Stunt coordinator Paul Jennings oversaw practical stunts, including the opening plane hijack where an entire fuselage was dropped from AC-130 in Scotland. The Bat, the flying vehicle, was a full-scale prop built around a helicopter rig, not CGI for close shots. Box office performance. Despite opening under the shadow of the Aurora, Colorado tragedy on July 20, 2012, which led Warner Brothers to withhold early grosses out of respect, the film opened to $160.8 million domestically, the third biggest opening ever at that time behind The Avengers and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. It grossed $448 million domestic and over $632 million international for a worldwide total of $1.081 billion, making it the second film of 2012 to cross $1 billion after The Avengers, and still the highest-grossing Batman film unadjusted for inflation. It was the 7th highest-grossing film of all time upon release. Awards and reception over time. The film received 1 BAFTA nomination for production design and was nominated for Best Action Film at the Critics' Choice Awards. It was notably snubbed for Oscar nominations, which many attributed to the Academy's bias against superhero films at the time. Hans Zimmer's score was disqualified from Oscar consideration because too many composers were credited on the official cue sheet, a technicality. Critically, it holds an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes and 78 on Metacritic at launch. Initial reviews were positive but more divided than The Dark Knight. Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, praising its ambition but noting its sprawl. Over time, its reputation has fluctuated. Immediately after release it was seen as a satisfying but imperfect finale. In the late 2010s, after the divisive DCEU launches, many reappraised it as the last serious, auteur-driven Batman film, and its themes of economic collapse and populist uprising felt more prescient. Since 2020, TikTok and Letterboxd have elevated Bane and Catwoman as standout characters, while also criticizing plot holes like how Bruce gets back to Gotham. Cultural impact and controversies. The film's biggest controversy outside cinema was its unintended association with the Aurora shooting, where a gunman attacked a midnight screening. This led to a national conversation about violence in theaters and security. Behind the scenes, there were 2 major talking points. One was Bane's voice. Initial IMAX prologue screenings in December 2011 attached to Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol were criticized because audiences could not understand Hardy. Nolan mixed the audio again but refused to dub him or make him sound like a typical villain. The second was the ending. Nolan shot 2 endings for security and had Bale, Hathaway and Caine sign strict NDAs. The final cafe scene was shot with a minimal crew in Florence without public notice. The film cemented the template for the grounded, prestige superhero trilogy that Marvel would later chase with Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and that Matt Reeves would respond to with The Batman in 2022. It proved a superhero film could end, rather than just set up the next one. 1. Detailed plot explanation, spoiler-free plus light spoilers. The structure of The Dark Knight Rises is deliberately different from the previous 2 films. Batman Begins was a linear origin. The Dark Knight was a tight, escalating 48-hour crime thriller. Rises is an epic, a 3-act war film that spans months, almost like a historical novel. Act 1, The Fallen City and the Fallen Man. The film opens 8 years after The Dark Knight. Gotham has experienced peace built on a lie. The Dent Act, passed in honor of Harvey Dent, has given police sweeping powers to lock up organized crime without parole. Gordon has cleaned up the streets, but at the cost of covering up that Dent became Two-Face and that Batman took the blame. This is crucial thematically. The piece is inauthentic, and Nolan frames Gotham as a city living on borrowed time. Bruce Wayne is 38, physically destroyed and spiritually retired. Alfred tells us he has no cartilage in his knees, elbows and shoulders. He is a Howard Hughes figure, bearded, hiding in the east wing of a rebuilt Wayne Manor, having poured his money into a failed fusion reactor project with Miranda Tate. His arc begins in stagnation. He has lost Rachel Dawes, he believes his mission is over, and he has no reason to live beyond the cowl. This is why Selina Kyle is introduced as a mirror. She is introduced burgling Wayne Manor, stealing his mother's pearls, and she is also stuck. She wants a clean slate program that will erase her identity. Both are thieves in different ways, stealing from themselves a future. Bane is introduced in a spectacular plane heist. He is excommunicated from the League of Shadows by Ra's al Ghul because he was too extreme even for them. His plan, which we only slowly understand, is to fulfill Ra's mission to destroy Gotham, but in a more theatrical way. He wants Gotham to destroy itself first. The inciting incident is the theft of Bruce's fingerprints by Selina working for Bane's men, orchestrated by businessman John Daggett. This leads Bruce to don the suit again. His first return fight in the sewers is deliberately underwhelming. He wins, but he is slow, he gets stabbed, and he needs Selina to save him. It sets up that this is not a triumphant return. Act 2, The Breaking. The centerpiece of the second act is 2 parallel traps. Bane uses Wayne Enterprises stock exchange to bankrupt Bruce, and then reveals himself in the sewers to Gordon's team. The famous stadium sequence is where Bane detonates explosives under Gotham Stadium, kills Dr. Pavel, the nuclear physicist, and announces he has taken the fusion reactor and turned it into a decaying neutron bomb. He also blows all bridges and tunnels except one, cutting Gotham off. Then comes the fight that defines the film. Bane vs. Batman in the sewers under Wayne Tower. Nolan shoots this almost like a boxing match. Bane is not faster, but he is technically brutal. He breaks Batman's cowl, his fighting spirit, and then his back over his knee, a direct homage to Nightfall. This is not just physical defeat, it is ideological. Bane tells Bruce he has merely adopted the darkness, while he was born in it. Bruce is thrown into the pit. The pit is the spiritual core of the film. It is an ancient prison in an unnamed Middle Eastern country where Bane was born. Only one person has ever escaped, a child, the child of Ra's al Ghul. The prisoner next to Bruce tells him that despair is necessary. The physical injury is healed by a prison doctor who literally punches his vertebrae back in. The real healing is mental. Bruce must rediscover fear. He watches Gotham on a smuggled television as Bane institutes martial law. Meanwhile, Gotham's storyline becomes no man's land. Bane releases all prisoners from Blackgate under the Dent Act, gives a speech in front of Blackgate that is essentially a populist revolution speech about giving Gotham back to the people, and lets the city descend into kangaroo courts led by Dr. Jonathan Crane and Scarecrow. Wealthy citizens are exiled across the ice of the frozen river. John Blake, a young cop who deduced Bruce's Batman, tries to keep orphans safe and works with Gordon, who is now a guerrilla leader. Selina disappears. Act 3, The Rising. The film's title pays off here through repetition. Bruce attempts to climb out of the pit twice and fails. The ritual requires climbing without a rope, because fear must be faced. The prisoners chant Deshi Basara, which translates to rise. On the third attempt, Bruce makes the leap, and the chant becomes triumphant. The imagery is overtly rebirth, even baptismal. His return to Gotham is intentionally unexplained to preserve mythic logic. He reappears as a symbol. He lights a fire on a bridge to show Gordon that Bruce is back. He reunites with Selina, offering her a chance to be more than a thief, and with Lucius Fox and his team. The final battle is not a one-on-one fight but a citywide war. Cops versus mercenaries on Wall Street. Batman versus Bane again, but now Bruce fights smarter, targeting the mask and damaging it. When Bane is defeated, the film pulls its major twist. Miranda Tate is revealed as Talia al Ghul, Ra's daughter, and the child who escaped the pit, while Bane was her protector. She stabs Batman and leaves to detonate the bomb. The climax then splits into 3 simultaneous rescues. Gordon and Fox try to stop the bomb from the reactor truck, Blake tries to get civilians across the bridge, and Batman must get the bomb out to sea using the bat. Selina returns, kills Bane with the Batpod's cannons, and chooses to be a hero. Narratively, the film works because it is structured around false endings. Gotham thinks it is saved, then it is lost. Bruce thinks he is done, then he must begin again. The pacing is intentionally exhausting. Nolan wants you to feel the 6-month occupation of Gotham. 2. In-depth critical review and analysis. Direction. Christopher Nolan directs Rises like a man trying to end the world with practical effects. His greatest strength here is scale management. The film has a cast of thousands, multiple cities, and huge set pieces, yet it never feels like green screen mush. When the football field collapses, it was a real field with real extras falling into real hydraulic pits. When Bane drives tumblers down Wall Street, those are real trucks. This tactile quality makes the stakes feel physical, unlike many later MCU third acts that collapse into CGI sky beams. However, Nolan's weakness is also visible. He is so committed to momentum that he rushes emotional beats that needed air. Bruce healing a broken back in a prison in a few months, Talia's reveal monologue delivered in a dying truck, Blake's realization that Bruce is Batman based on an orphan story, all are directed with urgency over clarity. Screenplay, written by Jonathan and Christopher Nolan, the screenplay is ambitious to a fault. It attempts to tie together every thread from 2 previous films while introducing 2 major villains and a new hero archetype. On a thematic level it is airtight. On a plot level it is leaky. The strengths. The dialogue for Bane is Shakespearean and memorable, every line is aphoristic, you merely adopted the dark, oh you think darkness is your ally. The banter between Bruce and Selina is screwball comedy in a war film and it works because Hathaway sells it with timing. The scene where Alfred confesses he burned Rachel's letter is one of the most emotionally devastating scenes in any superhero film because it retroactively reframes Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. The weaknesses. The screenplay relies heavily on coincidence and withholding. Why would Bane keep Bruce alive and in a prison with a television that can see Gotham? Why would Talia hide her identity for so long when she could have killed Bruce as Miranda in Wayne Manor? Why does Bruce's plan to escape Gotham with Selina after the bomb involve autopilot that he fixed 6 months earlier? Nolan often uses what screenwriters call the clock and the bomb, literally here, to paper over logic gaps. If you watch moment to moment, the dialogue propels you past them. If you stop and think, many scenes do not hold up to strict logic. That is a trade-off Nolan accepts. Acting performances. Christian Bale gives his most vulnerable performance as Wayne. He is no longer the cool playboy of Begins or the intense crusader of Dark Knight. He is tired, and Bale plays tiredness physically, moving like an old athlete. His best scene is not in the suit but when he says goodbye to Alfred after Alfred threatens to leave. Michael Caine, in that scene, breaks down and it is arguably the best acting in the trilogy. Tom Hardy is extraordinary under prosthetics. He acts almost entirely with eyes and shoulders. He cannot use his mouth, so he tilts his head, widens his stance, uses his hands like a dictator. Compare his stillness to Heath Ledger's jittery Joker. It is a completely different kind of menace, less chaotic and more fundamentalist. And Hathaway steals the film. She makes Selina Kyle the only character who has a complete arc from selfish to selfless without needing to die for it. Her fight choreography is elegant, her line delivery, "There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne, you and your friends better batten down the hatches, because when it hits, you're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us," is delivered with a working-class contempt that no other character provides. Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Gary Oldman are the moral spine, but Marion Cotillard is miscast or misdirected. Her Talia reveal death scene has become infamous for its abrupt acting choice, and it undermines what should be the emotional twist. Cinematography, Wally Pfister's final collaboration with Nolan before Pfister moved to directing Transcendence. Shot on Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2 and IMAX 65mm, the film has a desaturated, almost winter palette. Gotham is no longer the orange-lit Chicago of Begins or the blue-black Chicago, New York of Dark Knight. It is Pittsburgh in winter, gray, with bare trees. The IMAX sequences, particularly the opening plane hijack, the stadium collapse, and the final flight over the city, have an aspect ratio shift to 1.43 to 1 that creates a literal rising feeling. The image gets taller. Pfister uses wide lenses for Gotham to make it feel trapped and close lenses for the pit to make it feel infinite. Editing, Lee Smith had to cut a film with a 164-minute assembly that originally had even more Bane backstory and Scarecrow trial scenes. The cross-cutting in the final 30 minutes between Gordon disarming the bomb, Blake leading the orphans, and Batman flying is classic Nolan cross-cutting on a deadline, similar to Inception's kick sequence. However, the pacing in the second act sags during the 5-month occupation montage, because Nolan tells us time passes but does not show how Gotham survives. A few more scenes of daily life under Bane would have made the liberation more earned. Music is score. Hans Zimmer's score is not as iconic as the Dark Knight's two-note Joker theme, but it is more emotionally complex. He builds Bane's chant Deshi Basara from a recording of thousands of people chanting in different languages, layered and slowed. Selina's theme is a single, slinky violin motif that sneaks in. The main rising motif is two chords that ascend, C minor to ebb, over and over, mimicking the climb. The use of the Batpod chase theme Why Do We Fall, which reworks the Begins theme, during Bruce's climb is devastatingly effective. Zimmer has said this was the hardest of the trilogy to score because it needed to sound like an ending. Production design and costume, Nathan Crowley's Gotham is now a city of barricades and graffiti that says the time has come. The court of Scarecrow with a rope and snow is chilling. The Batcave is now under Wayne Manor's ruins, more refined. Bane's coat, based on a Swedish Army cold-weather jacket, and his mask, designed by costume effects supervisor Graham Churchyard, became Halloween staples. Compared to similar films, Rises is closer to David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia or Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which Nolan cited, than to Avengers. It wants to be about revolution, not just villainy. That ambition makes it messier than The Dark Knight, but also more interesting than most finales which simply go bigger. 3. Themes, symbolism and deeper meaning. The Dark Knight Rises is a film about legends, lies, and what happens after the war. The lie of order and the myth of peace. The central political theme is that Gotham's peace is built on a lie, Harvey Dent's martyrdom. Nolan is drawing from post-9/11 America and post-financial crisis anger. The Dent Act is the Patriot Act, security bought with truth. Gordon's opening monologue, "We were in a time of peace," shows he knows the peace is rotten. Bane's speech outside Blackgate is pure populist rhetoric. He says, "We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it back to you, the people." For a moment, he sounds like a revolutionary. Nolan is not endorsing Bane, but he is showing how easily legitimate grievance about inequality. Wayne Enterprises has a fusion reactor that could give free energy but is shelved for profit, can be co-opted by a nihilist who just wants to watch the world burn. This was prescient in 2012, before Occupy Wall Street fully matured and before later populist movements globally. Pain as identity, Bane's mask is the film's central symbol. In the comics it delivers venom, a super steroid. Here it is an anesthetic that keeps agony at bay. Bane cannot live without pain, only manage it. He inflicts that philosophy on everyone. He tells Batman, "I will not kill you until you have suffered." His rule of Gotham is not to kill quickly but to make Gotham suffer through a slow hope, telling them the bomb will detonate in 5 months, giving them time to imagine. This mirrors Bruce's own relationship to pain. Bruce uses pain as penance for his parents' death and for Rachel. Alfred says, "You are using the death of Rachel as an excuse to end your life." The pit forces Bruce to understand pain not as something to be numbed but as something to be feared again. The first time he climbs without the rope, he is afraid to die, and that fear makes him alive. This is straight Jungian psychology. The shadow must be integrated. Rise as resurrection, the title is literal and metaphorical. Deshi Basara is repeated over 20 times. Every character must rise. Bruce rises from the pit, from billionaire to prisoner to symbol. Selina rises from thief to hero, literally rising from the sewers to the rooftops. Blake rises from beat cop to inheritor. Even Gotham rises from its river ice. Nolan structures this with vertical imagery. Gotham is shown from below looking up at Wayne Tower, then from above when Bane looks down. The pit is a vertical shaft where light is at the top. Batman's final flight is vertical, rising above the city. Water and ice are baptismal symbols. When Bruce climbs out, he is born again, covered in dust, screaming. Fatherhood and legacy. The film is obsessed with fathers. Bruce is haunted by Thomas Wayne and by Ra's al Ghul, who claim to be a father figure in Begins. Bane is a father to Talia, having protected her in the pit. Gordon is a father figure to Blake. Blake is a father figure to the orphans. Alfred is Bruce's true father, and their separation is the emotional climax. Alfred's line, "I never wanted you to come back to Gotham, I always knew there was nothing here for you except pain and tragedy, and I wanted something more for you than that, I still do," reframes the entire trilogy. Alfred does not want Batman, he wants Bruce to live. The ending where Bruce passes the mantle to Blake is about legacy not being blood. Talia thinks legacy is revenge for her father. Bruce learns legacy is letting go. The mask and the true self. Every major character wears a mask. Batman's cowl, Bane's pain mask, Selina's goggles, Blake's cop uniform that hides his idealism, Miranda Tate's corporate philanthropist mask that hides Talia. The film asks when masks protect and when they imprison. Selina says the line that sums it up, "You think you can steal and get away with a clean slate, but you can't. You have to face who you are." Bruce can only stop being Batman when he stops hiding behind him. That is why the final shot of Bruce in Florence without a mask, alive, with Selina, matters. He is finally Bruce, not Batman. Psychologically, Bane and Batman are twins. Both were trained by the League of Shadows. Both were broken by loss. Both believe in theatricality. The difference is Bruce believes people can be better than their worst moment. Bane believes people will turn on each other if given permission. The 5-month experiment of Gotham is Bane's proof. And to an extent, he is right, Gotham does descend into show trials. But Blake, Gordon, and the ordinary cops who go underground prove him wrong. 4. Final verdict and recommendation. Overall rating, 8.4 out of 10. The Dark Knight Rises is a flawed masterpiece, which is a better thing to be than a perfect, safe film. It fails in places where The Dark Knight succeeded, plot tightness, a singular villain performance that defines a decade, and it succeeds in places where The Dark Knight never tried, scope, emotional closure, and mythic weight. Its strengths are overwhelming when taken as an ending. It dares to ask what happens after the hero wins. Most superhero franchises never ask that because they cannot afford to end. Nolan can. He gives Bruce Wayne the one thing no other Batman film has ever given him, an ending where he gets to live. That choice alone makes it radical. Bale's Batman does not die for Gotham, he lives for himself, which is a more adult idea of heroism. The image of the Bat flying out over the ocean with Zimmer's score swelling is genuinely moving because we understand the cost: 8 years of isolation, a broken body, a broken heart, and a city that blamed him. Its weaknesses are real and should not be dismissed. Talia al Ghul's twist is undercooked and robs Bane of his agency in the final 10 minutes. The logistics of Bruce's return to Gotham, the nuclear bomb's timer that conveniently decays, the police force that hides underground for months and then comes out with clean uniforms, these require a generous viewer. If you are a viewer who values airtight plotting, you will be frustrated. If you are a viewer who values theme and emotion, you will forgive. Who is this movie best suited for? This is not the best entry point into Batman. If you have never seen Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, much of the emotional payoff will be lost. It is best suited for viewers who loved the trilogy's ambition, for people who like political thrillers disguised as comic book movies, for fans of Dickens and epic cinema, for viewers who want a superhero film about consequences rather than origins. It is also ideal for fans of practical filmmaking and IMAX spectacle. It is less suited for viewers who want a light, quippy Marvel tone, for those who want Catwoman to be purely sexualized rather than a complex anti-hero, or for younger children. The film is bleak and long, with torture and martial law. Lasting impact. In 2012, it felt like the end of an era of serious superhero films before the MCU made everything interconnected. In retrospect, it predicted the cultural exhaustion with endless sequels. Its influence can be seen in Avengers, Endgame's attempt to give its heroes an ending, in Black Panther's stadium speech, in the Batman's focus on Gotham as a real city. Bane's voice and mannerisms have become permanent internet language, and Tom Hardy's coat is still sold. More importantly, it proved that a studio could let a director end his franchise, not reboot it mid-story. Rewatch value, extremely high, but different each time. First watch is for plot. Second watch is for foreshadowing. Notice how Miranda Tate always stands behind Bane in shots, how John Blake's first scene is in an orphanage where Bruce Wayne visited, how the clean slate device is mentioned early and pays off at the end. Third watch is for theme. You start to see how many times Nolan says rise, fall, legend, myth. Detailed personal recommendation. Watch it on the biggest, best sound system you can, with no phone. This film was mixed for IMAX 6-track sound, and Bane's voice was designed to vibrate in your chest. Watch it as a double feature with Batman Begins. Skip The Dark Knight for one night, to see Bruce's full arc from afraid boy to free man. Pay attention to Michael Caine. His performance is the secret heart. When he cries at Wayne Manor, let it land. And when the credits roll and you see the cafe in Florence, do not immediately search for explanations about how Bruce survived. Nolan is telling you that some legends need to end with a little magic, that Batman can become a symbol that no longer needs Bruce, and that Bruce can finally become a man who does not need Batman. If you want a perfect crime thriller, watch The Dark Knight. If you want a story about why we need to believe that a man can fall and still get up again, watch The Dark Knight Rises, and watch it all the way to the end where Blake finds the Batcave and the platform rises.